Last week, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu signed into law the 2024 appropriation bill at the presidential villa, Abuja. Tinubu signed the 28.7 trillion budget, which is 1.2 trillion higher than the budget he proposed to a joint session of the National Assembly on November 29, 2023. However, despite concerns over the increasing recurrent expenditure by the states, particularly given their low level of productivity and contribution to gross domestic product GDP, the federal and state governments have earmarked a total of about 17.04 trillion for recurrent expenditure in 2024, while the sum of 8.27 trillion is earmarked for salaries, subsidy transfers, and other non-capital spending by the federal government. Recurrent expenditure by the states will go up 8.77 trillion. These day reports gathered that of the combined 44.93 trillion 2024 annual budget of both tiers of government, a sum of 17.38 trillion is set aside for capital projects. Allows data collected by data analyst services and resource integrated that states that the states have a combined annual budget of 16.5 trillion, of which recurrent expenditure will go up 8.77 trillion. On the other hand, of the federal government's 28.78 trillion appropriation, the sum of 8.27 trillion is earmarked for recurrent expenditure, transfers, and non-capital spending. Joining us now to discuss the high cost of government's recurrent expenditure, which is the major cause of debt burden and debt servicing in Nigeria, is Paul Alaje, a Nigerian economist and chief economics partner at SPM Professional. Good to see you again. Happy New Year, my brother. I'd like to ask you this. Should we be having a 28.7 trillion budget when we truly know we are not making that amount of revenue and we cannot afford it at a time where we have high debts, and which we know most of the money will be frittered away in corruption anyway?
Well, first of all, let me say thank you so very much for having me. Happy New Year to you, the team, and the citizens of our country, and not everybody watching me around the world. 28 trillion naira, when we look at it in naira terms, is a huge amount. Do I think that we will meet up with this expectation in terms of revenue and money to be borrowed? I doubt. We need to check what happened last year to make prediction for this year. Last year, we projected that we're going to make nearly double of what we made, but what we realized last year in revenue was only 5 trillion naira, less than 6 trillion. What we did differently was that we borrowed more money to make provision for the shortfall. In fact, we would have even generated less than that amount, but for subsidy removal, that now put more money in the pocket of the federal government and the state government together. This year is a fresh start for President Tinubu. That means with subsidy gone, as well as exchange rates, which means then has completely been devalued, that will, of course, put more money in the pocket of government. But will this money be up to 18 trillion naira? Honestly, I doubt. What seems to be achievable will be around 12 trillion naira of 28 trillion naira. The projection is that we'll make 12, and if we have surpassed ourselves, maybe 15, which, of course, is looking highly unreachable for the year, based on the reality of last quarter, 2 quarters ago, that's third quarter of 2023. So with this amount, you mentioned, can we meet up this amount? So the answer I have is that there are a lot of doubt regarding how we are going to meet up with the amount, and there are several explanations that can go into that. Now, is this budget enough? The truth is that Nigeria requires a minimum of $100 billion investment in infrastructure. We also need not less than $5 billion investment in education, as well as health. The question is, have we been able to even meet up with the critical investment, let alone security? What you realize is that since the beginning of recent democracy, 1999 till date, we've not been able to invest in terms of federal government expenditure up to $50 billion. The current budget, as huge as it is, use 800 naira to divide what government called expected exchange rates, because that exchange rate was adjusted. And that's one of the reasons why we can say we have more money. It's not that we have actually improved in value. But we are either adjusting values, because when exchange rate was 400 the last budget, the recent budget exchange rate is now 800. Effectively, we have multiplied money by 2 by just adjusting exchange rate from what it was to what it is. So it's more money for the government. But what happens to the pocket of the people? That's not the question. So here is it. Are we going to generate that much? I doubt. Do we need more than that? I think we need more than ×3 of that. So what we should be looking at is to become more innovative. Where we other resources come from, where we other monies come from. But when you look at government independent revenues to be generated, and you look at government corporate income tax, which is CIT, and you are also looking at what immigration and custom will give us, as well as, of course, other revenue to be generated by the FRS, I doubt very much if all of this, including the money from crude oil, will give us up to that amount because of the reality of Nigeria today and the situation generally with businesses today. I doubt. But I believe that the team will try, but will they get to that amount? Well, it's another kettle of fish. Remember that when President Buhari got to office, in fact, we said that we're going to do away with everything revenue from crude, because not too long from that, from that time, we saw economic quagmire in 2016, where President Buhari was in office. All the expectation we had, we were unable to meet up to 60% of the target of government expectation. So budget is a projection, is expected revenue and expected income. But the closer it is to reality, the better for us. If not, ways and means we suffer again. If not, debt, we cross the bound. And I can tell you, if we don't cross 100 trillion naira debt profile this year, certainly we will cross it next year by the end of 2025. But the chances are high that by this year, because we're already above 80 trillion, recall that this time last year, I had a conversation with you on debt profile of Nigeria, which I projected by 2024. By the January 2024, I mentioned to you that that debt profile would have crossed 77 trillion. That prediction has come true, because as we speak, it's now over 80 trillion. And I'm here to tell you another one, that by the end of 2025, if the care is not taken, we would have surpassed 100 trillion naira in debts as a nation.
All right. Thank you for highlighting the debt and just giving us an overview of the debt servicing and debt profile, especially based on what has been called the budget of renewed hope. The first question I'd ask you, of course, is that does this budget inspire hope or renew hope, especially for economists like you and analysts like you, and in terms of what the government hopes to achieve with the details? And also, during the speech, the budgetary speech by the president, he had talked about one of the key areas where they are most proud of with this budget, which is the fact that they put a bit more money into capital projects or capital expenditure as a departure from the old. Are you confident about this, optimistic about this as the presidency is? And like you mentioned, side by side, the investment that must be made over the next 10 years in capital to bridge the infrastructural gap, are we on the right path, or should more money be allocated? In light of the fact that we still have, like you've highlighted already, debts that have to be paid and also recurrent expenditure. Finally, as you speak about that, I want you to talk about how can we reduce recurrent expenditure, especially overhead costs, as highlighted in this budget?
Well, I will start by looking at the debt service, which I think was your first question. A number of questions, I hope I remember everything. I can tell you that when you look at the debt profile today and the servicing, which is the cost of debt, not my word, the current Minister of Finance and the coordinating Minister of the Economy was asked by a session of the National Assembly, I'm not sure whether it's Senate or House of Representatives or joint session, I'm not very sure now. And he has responded by saying, and this was about 6 or 7 weeks ago, he had mentioned that 98% of all revenue was used to service debts. What does that mean? If we had had a budget, because that particular year, 2023, there was a budget, and we never envisaged that 98% of that budget in real terms, after subsidy has been removed, after Naira has been devalued, will be used to service debt. Recall that a minister before him, the former minister, had mentioned at a time, Q1 of 2021, when he was giving report, that over 100% of all revenue has been used to service debt. What is the future in our debt service? I'll tell you. By 2025 again, end of 2025, if the care is not taken and urgent decisions made regarding rearranging and restructuring, if for the lack of word, of the accurate word to use, rearrangement, realignment, that's the accurate word, of our economy. The truth is that by 2025, we will have to borrow to service debt. What does that mean? Yes, we will still put our revenue projection, but by end of 2025, when the 2026 budget is being presented, you might be saying that when you start living the 2026 budget life, we may need to even borrow to service debt. But I hope this will not be the situation, because it's not a good projection. Unfortunately, if we don't depart from the norm, this may be what we will find ourselves. You ask whether the budget inspire hope. Well, economics, our training and the oath we sworn to is not to say yes or no to questions like this. There are things we need to check. What is happening to growth? Nigeria is expected to grow, if it wants to be among the nations with which it should pair with, between 7 to 12% GDP growth rate. This budget has said it will grow by 3+ growth rate. Inflation of Nigeria, according to Central Bank of Nigeria, is expected to be between 6 to 9%. This budget has said inflation will be at 21%, perhaps because it's the first budget of President Tinubu, and perhaps maybe next year President Tinubu will submit a budget. I haven't studied what the economy will look like this year. So that budget is already telling us that things are going to be tough. Without adding anything to it, if you are going to surpass what is good for your country at 6 to 9%, and the budget is saying, don't worry, I don't want to give you false hope, because that is how I interpret it. Things are going to be tough. The price of commodity you buy in 2023 December, by 2024 December, is going to increase by an average, I beg your pardon, of 21.something%. That is according to the budget that have been presented by Mr. President. So what will happen to exports? What will happen to imports? So many other things that are in that budget, because you need to check what the macroeconomic variable will be. Most importantly, Mr. President spoke on Human Development Index, and he said that is the key area they are voting money. But let's zoom on it a little. We're expected to invest between 20 to 25% of our annual budget in it. But when you see what went into education, vis-a-vis the entire budget, you see that we are doing less than 6%. Meanwhile, we should do between 15 to 25%. Let's look at health. Abuja Accord was 15%. What is invested in that budget, again, is less than that amount. So is this really inspiring what you asked me earlier, or is not? Well, I will leave that for the Nigerians to pick a copy of the budget and see. And again, this is the first budget of President Bola Tinubu. I want to believe that the one that will come in subsequent year will be much better. And that even though I commend the fact that the president signed, of course, in recent history, on the 1st of January, I can also tell you that the time of submission of that budget was rather too late. The budget office should make budget, the literature, what literature agrees is that the budget office should make budget ready for Mr. President and Federal Executive Council not later than September. Before the end of that month, it is expected that the president will take it to the National Assembly. Meanwhile, the Assembly will have about 90 days to meet with all the committees and submit the same for President for his final signature, which I believe is what we should do from the end of this year. You talk about recurrent expenditure in economics. Recurrent expenditure, unlike how we define it in Nigeria, debt recurrent and non-debt recurrent. There is nothing like that in economics. What you have is recurrent and capital. Those are two broad lines. You can now divide recurrent into two, which is whether you are spending on debt service or other things. And some economies, some countries even divide it beyond two. So what we have today, the government has voted beyond the usual 25 to 30% to about 34+%, or assumingly or approximately 35%. So there is a marginal increase in capital expenditure. We must give it to them. But will this marginal increase be sufficient? Of course, the answer is no. We need to get to a point where we need our capital expenditure to grow sporadically from this 30-35% to 50-60%. So how are we going to do that? When you look at the overhead of government, when you look at humongous amounts and the kind of money that we voted to something that are not having direct impact on our economy. I believe we need to change this today. I believe we need to improve in recurrent expenditure. And it's not just for the federal government. When you zoom in on the subnational and look at how some states are spending their recurrent, and of course, in the wake of currency devaluation, I can tell you a state in southwest Nigeria that hold about $99 million at 400 naira at exchange rate. Now, even though the state collects more money from the FAC account, the IGR of the state is still barely the same. But when you look at what they now hold, you now need to multiply 99 million by 800 naira. And what the state should do is to wait till March or next month when the debt management office will release the update of the debt of the state. Then we know that we have tough time ahead even in that state.
So let's do two things. Number one, let's talk about ways and means. Possible securitization coming up of ways and means. That's one issue on top of the front burner. And let's also talk about the states of our states. A lot of people argue that they dropped the ball way too many times. What's your take on this?
Well, I will start with your second question. The fact is that when you look at the survival rates of states, which I think an organization, Budget, have done a report on that, I can tell you that apart from 6, and if you want to carry some on trial, 10 states, the remaining states are actually not, they cannot stand on their own without the support of federal government. In fact, without federal government giving them 66% of what they are earning today, most of the states, of course, we have major economic challenge. And we know when economic challenge persists for a long time, what you are going to see is security challenges. So states are not in good shape right now. Some of the states are bedeviled with a lot of huge debt profile. Some of them, their budget, when you look at it, is upside down. When you look at also what some of them are doing, the challenge is that Nigeria, everybody focuses on federal government without looking at the state. So the survival rate of states is very low. The capital votes into, monies into capital project for state and education is also really very low. I think the education and orientation that was given to assembly member should also extend to some states, key commissioners, governors, and so on and so forth. Because there is no way, even if you have a perfect federal government and you have 36 states that are not doing well, honestly, it will surely weigh down the Nigerian government. Look at what President Buhari did during his administration, unlike what President Obasanjo did during the administration. President Buhari brought economic recovery and growth program. When he brought that program, less than 6 states keyed into the program. The program failed. President Obasanjo brought leads, he brought it down to seed, he brought it down, he brought needs, brought it down to seed, brought it down to leads. And that was communicated. And that is why you saw the kind of growth in terms of policy under, I think, Okonjo-Iweala at the time. So to me, it's something that we really need to focus on, because our state right now, I can tell you, apart from 6 to 10 of them that are arguably doing, and I've added FCT to that number, because in the recent there are about just 6 or 9 states that are manageably, that are doing well with their IGR, with their reliance on the federal government, with their capital infrastructure. Imagine a state in the northeast that is generating less than 10 billion, less than 1 billion naira every month. As a whole state is generating less than that amount. And we hope that economic miracle will happen to the state. And we hope that because people's lives are miserable, there will be security. It's going to be practically impossible until states become more innovative in finding alternative revenue apart from dependence on the federal government. Then it's going to be a big issue. If I get your first question again, I think I will respond to it.
I talked about securitization of ways and means. The legality of that.
Yeah,
the fact that we have to go
issue.
through that. Yeah.
Big issue. Well, I'm really surprised that is mentioned in the public space now that we want to securitize ways and means again. Recall that the last time I had conversation, of course, with you and your colleague on ways and means and how illegal it was for us not to print money. You know, when economics says we are printing money, we are not saying that we went to a printing press or a minting and printing of some sort and print money. When there is no money, when government don't owe any money, and the central bank is giving money by creating it digitally, you can also equate that to quantitative easing. You know, giving the money to government to spend, assuming that all will be well. Inflation. That is one of the reasons why this inflation, I understand the international reasons that have been given by some persons at different headquarters, that there are international pressure and all of those things. But the value of the money will be worthless. Watch it. What was Naira in 2015? What is Naira today? What was Naira in 2019? What is it today? If you don't depart from this old path and generate real money, America is the one that print dollar. Why is America not just printing dollar and just build all their infrastructure, and just because they know the import? Dollar will be worthless if we don't change and we continue to securitize, because, well, federal government in a way hold the central bank and we can take any decision. The truth is that even those, any 1 million naira today, that 1 million may be equivalent of 100,000 in the next 3 years if we continue to securitize ways and means and not allow federal government to become more responsible. Originally, federal government can collect up to 5% of the previous year's revenue they've generated, and they are to retire the money by the end of the year. Recently, as a result of what was told to National Assembly and the defense that the former central bank governor gave to the National Assembly, said National Assembly reviewed that and increased it, I think, to 10 or 15%, I think 15%, and also securitize humongous amounts into ways and means. That is what brought our debt to this huge amount. And as at that time, the Debt Management Office was not even aware that such money has gone to federal government. So if we continue to securitize, I can tell you that the projection of 21% from the current 28% may not be a reality, because in economics, you cannot just clap with one hand. If you must clap, it's either you use your second hand or you find another person's second hand to clap. So government must therefore know that, yes, it's simple economics to want to find shortcuts to solutions, but unfortunately, we will always have to be punished, because for all economic sins, you would have to be punished. Will we wait to receive the canes and the strokes of this excessive borrowing without being innovative? Will we wait or follow what the law says regarding 5% or 15%, as the case may be, under ways and means, so that we quickly retire the money for us to have access to such money later? If government wants to borrow more money, it's not a problem, but we need to generate this money in revenue and follow exactly what the law says, because of the health of the economy. Collecting monies from central bank in ways and means is like drinking sugar, quips of sugar, believing that it's available because we have a sugar manufacturing plant, and we start consuming it, hoping that we'll become fat. Yes, we will become fat, but very soon we may find ourselves on an emergency bed in an hospital, and I hope that would have equipped that hospital to take care of us. If it's an hospital that has not been equipped, honestly, there is nowhere to run to by going to international markets to borrow money and so on and so forth, because with today's exchange rate and making the money back in Nigeria is going to be huge concerns in the coming period. And that is why I have said, when I started having this conversation with you, that we need to rethink our economy. It's very important for us to rethink our economy. We need to quickly rethink it. We need to quickly realign it such that we can bring this country out of economic quagmire and our people out of poverty, deprivation, and hunger.
All right, well, thanks. I'd like us to end on a revenue conversation, talking about how we're going to finance this budget. Looking at the budget deficit, looking at revenue assumptions, one of which is, of course, revenue from oil. Now, according to the assumptions, they're looking at $77.96 per barrel and a production of 1.78 million barrels per day. And there have been some speculations as to how realistic that estimation is. On the plus side is the assumptions for exchange rate and also the GDP growth rate. Earlier this morning, we talked about the fact that the UN had projected a growth rate of about 3.1%, but the assumption says 3.9%. And then in terms of revenue as well, the Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy had talked about also financing from MDAs being more productive. The president has said that there'll be quarterly reviews of budget performance from these MDAs. How realistic are these revenue assumptions? In fact, some economists are saying perhaps the budget deficit might increase because it's not very realistic in terms of revenue.
No, it will increase. No, budget deficit will increase. My hope is that budget deficit will not be ×2. We have 8 trillion naira proposed budget deficit, but that may increase to about 12 trillion naira, or it might double. So don't just write this down and keep it till around November, December, when you'll be seeing supplementary budget without revenue expectation. This has been our practice in the last 12 years, sending supplementary budget without accompanying revenue expectation. So what you start seeing from the end of first quarter is proposal for debt. And I know that Mr. Rufai, we had your humble self, we also bring this back to the fore, because from March, you start seeing pressure, because when we compare our first quarter revenue to our expected first quarter expenditure, there will be a mismatch, because fundamentally, there is need for an adjustment which you have not done. I saw all the budget proposal and the parameters for revenue, but I can tell you that I have not seen anything coming from solid mineral. How much is coming from that ministry in terms of gold, in terms of diamond, in terms of precious stones? I have not seen. I have not seen anything coming from the Ministry of Marine and what do we call it now? The blue economy. I have not seen. This is where we have our resources. This is where we have our resources. We have seen a comment by the Honorable Minister that have said that we can make a lot of money in trillions from the Minister of Mineral Resources. We have also heard National Assembly mention that we are losing trillions of naira. And I know that the whole money may not be for federal government, but what component of that trillion is going to federal government? These are things I expect Budget Office to engage critical stakeholders to now say, from your agency, how much is coming and how much are we going to have? Because ministers themselves will not go to the streets and pick up, but they can now administer the entire process to say how much we come to Nigeria as a nation and how much we get to federal government, so that this will reflect. The truth is that if we don't increase in this key critical sector, telecom, revenue, because of what the report of the National Bureau of Statistics said, the blue ocean economy, because of the opportunities, at least 7 trillion naira we are losing from that ministry. Government can take about 1 to 2 trillion revenue from that. And thirdly, the Ministry of Mineral Resources, because of how people are taking gold. I saw the boasted minister case say he has revoked all licenses, but who has been to all the mining sites? All right. And mining activity not still going on there in terms of revenue. Honestly, all the parameters mentioned without dismissing is limited. But I will anchor on this note. I've seen that we are still not going to generate up to 1.89 million barrels a day. Yeah. Do we say that we have given up, that those stealing our oil should keep stealing them? And why are we not even selling directly to these refineries that we say are now functional in Nigeria? That will be conversation for another day.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Paul Alaje. You're absolutely right. We cannot take all the issues, line after line, issues after issues this morning. However, we look forward to having further conversation with you and, of course, other guests on the show. Thank you for your time this morning.